This podcast is part of the Batman Universe Podcast Network, hosted by the BatmanUniverse.net. Check out everything related to Batman and the entire Bat family at the BatmanUniverse.net, including news and original content related to comics, movies, television, merchandise, video games, and more. Also, check out some of the other unique podcasts that TBU has to offer. Consider supporting this podcast by becoming a patron on Patreon. Even $1 can go a long way in supporting this content that you enjoy. Look for a link over at the BatmanUniverse.net to offer your support now. And now, on with the show.
Welcome to the latest episode of the TBU Specials, the podcast that deals with very specific topics on a very loose schedule. We haven't actually had a whole lot of TBU specials recently, but as you know, San Diego Comic-Con was just last month, and while San Diego Comic-Con was going on, while I myself was not there, both Don and Josh were in attendance on behalf of TBU and talked with a number of different people from a variety of different areas that we cover on the website, including movies and TV. And generally speaking, when we get back from San Diego Comic-Con, we typically release a really long TBU special diving into everything that happened at the con. And rather than doing that, we decided we're going to release the individual press junkets that we attended, the audio from each one of these, and so that you can hear everything that happened. But also, rather than having a massive episode, we'll just release a couple of these, periodically over the next couple weeks. So with that being said, the first one we've got is actually Pennyworth, which recently premiered on Epix. And this episode is going to, or this junket, we chat with Jack Bannon, who plays Alfred on the show, Ben Aldridge, who plays Thomas Wayne, Paloma Faith, who plays Bet Sykes, and we also talk with executive producers Bruno and Danny Cannon. So sit back and take a listen to everything that we have from. So sit back and take a listen to everything that we talked about when we would talk to the people both in front of the camera and behind the camera of the new show Pennyworth.
There are a lot of characters we could have considered, but Pennyworth was somebody who had zero backstory, and many times he's been portrayed as just this stiff kind of butler. It was really Michael Caine, when he worked with on those movies, those brilliant movies, who gave himself a military background. That made total sense to me, because this was a guy who was eventually going to mentor Bruce Wayne, and we did that in Gotham. The idea that he's not just mentoring him into a man and giving him advice, he's physically helping the guy. So this is a guy with a lot of experience, and so we wanted to go back and say, where did that experience and that maturity come from? And why would somebody at the very beginning of the story go, I'll never be a butler, Dad, forget that, when we know he will? What's going to happen to this guy? What journey will he go on to fulfill that destiny, and why? So that got us talking, and it was and then coupled with the fact that we could, for the first time ever, create a DC-style 1960s England, was just like, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's definitely it. I was worried at the beginning that we would know who the villains would be. But when you mine British history and you say, look, we're going to alter British history because this is an alternative DC reality, it's very close. It's only 13 degrees off. But what happened to Jack the Ripper's family? What happened to Myra Hindley? What happened to Jacqueline Hyde? Who's Dick Turpin here? When you start to realise that Guy Fawkes and all of these mythological characters and characters from British history are available to us, then you go, wow, that's an interesting bunch of villains there.
You can go first.
So talking about the tone of the season, what can you tell us? Like a mix of action, drama?
I think the arcing story this season is about a civil war that's brewing. And that came from a conversation when myself and Bruno were considering doing V for Vendetta. We were like, well, that's very much an 80s, 90s kind of show. What would it be in the 60s? What kind of world do we have to create? Like in Gotham, there will eventually be Batman. In this, there will eventually be V for Vendetta. So we took that as that civil war, or brewing civil war, as a stepping stone. And so England is just fresh out of a war, looking to get into another war. We don't know what deals it's made with other countries because the Second World War ended differently. So it's about espionage. It's almost like Funeral in Berlin or all those Cold War dramas, Michael Caine films became influences.
Making a comic book show comes with a lot of baggage and, sets of fandom pressures. What lessons did you guys learn and take from doing Gotham for 5 years that you applied to Pennyworth?
I think when we were proudest of Gotham is when we treated it as a show that stood by itself and we stopped adhering to like what comic books had done before. I always used to say it's like you're covering a song by the Beatles. You're not doing exactly like them and trying. It's you've got to give one singer one song. You've got to give the singer an opportunity to perform that song the way they want to perform it. So the minute we gave ourselves that freedom on Gotham, that helped us. And I think with this now, we just said, look, it's our take on this or bust. And if people don't like it, it's cool. You've got to just be proud of it, no matter what. So yeah, I just think that the DC canon is a beautiful place to go and it's a church to go pray in. But it doesn't want to be completely simulated every time. You need to go run with that.
One of the things that you talked about, and one of the things I really enjoyed was that the show stands on its own as its own entity, but it is kind of part of the DC Comics universe. So are there any comics in your mind or anything that you were inspired by from this universe?
You don't know until you're writing a scene or until you're directing a scene or until you see somebody actually performing a scene what your influences have been. I've read so much of that stuff, and I grew up with that stuff. I've watched everything. I'm like nerd number one here. So you don't realise what you've been inspired by until you actually see it. There's a couple of scenes within that that, along with Michael Caine or along with John Barry or along with great British designers of that time, there is a comic book image that you've set up one day and you're like, oh my god, now I remember that frame, but I didn't know it until that moment. So it's nice when that happens.
How important was it for you to kind of give us an insight into Alfred's family life? Because we get a lot of that in the first episode.
Oh yeah. Well, I think drama doesn't do that enough, and Bruno, I think, really had a good take on the parents. Because we'd spoken so much about why wouldn't Alfred want to be a butler. His father had to be a butler. He had to be able to talk to him in a way. And there's a great moment in episode 10, without giving too much away, where you see them together in butler attire. And it was really kind of a special moment because nothing says class system more like a butler. Not many people have butlers, do you know what I mean? And butlers were working class men who spent their whole lives 24/7 assisting, helping, and keeping the image up of privileged families. And we know that's what Alfred's going to end up doing. So watching him resist that as much as he can, but deep down it's in his DNA. I think that we had a lot of fun with that.
Time for one. When we watch the preview, visually we can almost see the difference between the Gotham and Pennyworth. I mean, Gotham, really great, dark overcast. Pennyworth has some warm tones, some brightness, like the scenery in the park. Are you trying to go for that visual effect of a different era? Plus, it's England.
Yes.
It's a different tone.
Yes.
It's a different period of time. Are you visually trying to go for a different aesthetic?
Absolutely. When I went back and looked at old films and old photographs, ironically, England wants to be cold, blue and grey constantly, but you have to fight that. And they were using a film stock called Agfa back in the day, or that old Kodak stock. And when I went back and looked at that, so much of it is tinted towards trying to cheer England up. And so I really took that, and I wanted to do a lot of fireplaces. So the warm glow of England and that tobacco-coloured stained walls and the cigar smoking, like that world I was very interested in, and all of my reference material was that. And it wasn't just that, because Gotham was much more comic book novel in that the images had to be impactful, and there was action, and it was very immediate. This I could slow down. I mean, one of the influences is The Crown, because The Crown had that 1950s period done very well, and it was calm, and it took its time, it was patient, like so many of those movies. So it was actually easier to shoot because I shot a lot less, a lot wider, and let the frames contain themselves like paintings, more than throwing the camera around for dynamic purposes. You know. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bruno Heller.
There's things that they're all walking towards me, like Toy Story.
Well, instead of Toy Story, this is Alfred's story.
Yep.
And what part of Alfred, story appealed to you when you guys decided to springboard from Gotham into this?
The first question, creating a character, the first question you'd ask. And Batman stories are very specific because everyone knows what the outcome is. So the question for me was, how does someone who was a brave man of action, an SAS soldier, become a butler? That's a strange journey. So answering that question was the sort of essence of how to portray his journey. And then it was really like taking all those brilliant Alfreds that have been portrayed in the past and creating a convincing version of that as a young man. And Jack Bannon, I think he does an amazing job. He's both cool and vulnerable. He's not macho, but you can see he can take care of himself. You can see the intelligence and you can see the heart.
And speaking of casting, did you have people in mind for these characters while you were creating it, or?
Didn't have people in mind because from a practical point of view, the whole explosion of TV in the last few years means that there's a real shortage on the market of actors. If you decide, I want so-and-so for it, you're going to find they're doing a 6-year role in something else. So didn't want to, especially with these iconic characters, it's much more about people coming into the room and just doing it right. With Jack, for instance, he had a little test piece of dialogue. And basically, there was a lot of name actors who went up for it, but basically 90% of them did the scene with menace. They did it and God love him, but they did it all as a sort of Jason Statham, and Jack was the only one who sort of sat back and did it with charm and understated threat, which is exactly what you want. Because with TV, you can't get people to pretend to be something they're not. You need someone who's going to be that person just naturally, and that's what Jack brought to it. Same thing with Ben playing Thomas. He has a sort of patrician, suave, cultivated air about him that creates that kind of 1950s style American who talked in a slightly English accent and carried themselves with those sort of good manners. Paloma, for instance, again, that brought such natural energy to it that as soon as we saw her, it's like, all right, I'll write to that. It's much more fun to write to the people that you get than to impose a character on them.
So with that Sykes, was her character more influenced by Paloma Faith and what she brought to it, or how did you go about creating this big bad villain out of your person?
The basis of it is a very sort of common archetype in English culture, which is a sort of strong, no-nonsense northern woman, Manchester woman. I don't know. It's a bit of, well, these are sort of maybe obscure to an American audience, but Elsie Tanner out of Coronation Street. Myra Hindley was a famous serial killer of the 1960s. A little bit of Dusty Springfield in there. And then that way of talking that she has, which is very sort of no-nonsense, direct, and just naturally funny. It's difficult. You can either do that or you can't. And Paloma, who isn't a northerner, Londoner like me, she did her own. And this never happens when people do their own self-taping. It's always and she just did it brilliantly, and all the executives didn't know that she was a famous pop star, but all said, she's the one. So as soon as she came in, as soon as I was able to write to her, it gives you the parameters of how far you can take the character. And Paloma, and she has a sister who will appear later, played by Polly Walker, and they just make a wonderful bad female duo in a way, and of a style and a sort of attitude that people haven't seen before. So once you see them doing stuff, they can do scenes where they don't say a word at all. They're just looking at people, and it's funny and scary and thrilling, you know?
So what is the most interesting and challenging part about creating the TV show that has such a big fan base, but also that you have the chance to create something new?
Yeah, that's always a challenge with the Batman world. To a degree, the challenge is not to be scared, and you have to stay off social media. Because in the early days of Gotham, just that's the thing with the world. There'll be people who like it and people who hate it with a passion, and you can't. Whatever you do, there's going to be people who don't like it or offends their notion of what happens in the world. You have to just jump off the cliff and let gravity take over, and find ways of, for me, the famous Easter egg thing. Who likes Easter eggs really anyway? But real Easter eggs, not TV Easter eggs. The more subtle the Easter eggs are, the better. Because Easter eggs should not be comprehensible to people who don't give a shit about the world. So the Easter eggs that we will have in the show are going to be ones that only people who really are deep into that world will understand, as opposed to the more obvious winks to the. I don't think we should wink at these things. You have to take the world seriously, at the same time be playful inside it. I've run you out of questions.
I'll get one more for you. What do you think?
No, sure, first.
Yeah. Even though it's a good try to start building a world of characters around the main characters, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Where Pennyworth is concerned, I guess the balance is to try not to lean too heavily on about what's going to happen with the Wayne family and the Kate Crusader fully rely on Pennyworth.
Yeah.
But do you struggle to make it so that even somebody who doesn't care about Batman can care about Pennyworth? Or
It's definitely, I mean, that's one of the advantages of taking the show so far back, that people know not to, the Joker is not going to appear, and it's a long game, so we're slowly moving towards the iconic versions of the characters that we know and love. And it also means, well, for instance, as soon as you bring Alfred's mum and dad into it, that immediately suggests storylines and emotional interest that you just can't do with him as this sort of elderly, alone guy. So it was very important to us to do a show that would appeal beyond the Batman audience, not just for sort of demographic reasons, but because I believe that the DC universe is kind of infinitely expandable. That's the beauty of myth. So the more you can expand it, in this case into a kind of real world, the better. And the DC fans, Batman fans, are growing up. We're like, new kids on the block. Eventually, they turn into old geezers on the block, and they have to have some kind of different shtick,
Speaking of different shit, you gotta go.
I said shtick, not shit. Thank you. Thank you.
Knows how to make a transition.
All right, thank you. I feel like you're the other one. I'm filthy mine. My else goes.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
How are you doing? You're like coming to Comic-Con, launching a show, all this attention, how's this all feel?
It's crazy. It's mad, because we shot the whole thing in London, and I'd go home at the end of every day, and I'd, go home at weekends, and my friends would be like, what are you up to? I'm like, I'm shooting this TV series, but, you'll hear about it. And now I come out here, and it's like a shitstorm. Like, it's crazy. The fans are mad. And it hasn't even premiered yet, so no one really knows who we are this year, but I've been told this is your free pass year. Next year, it'll be very different, but it's insane.
And how is it playing like Alfred Pennyworth? Because he's one of the most famous supporting characters in comics. So what is it like to kind of build the man before the butler?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's strange because obviously we've always seen him kind of stiff upper lip, straight guy, and this Alfred's got swag. He's Bruno's script was great, and that was my Bible. I started with that, and he had some great ideas, and we sat down and spoke about the great thing about when it's a first season like this, you're creating a whole world. So it's 1960s London, yes, but it's a DC 60s London. It's 13 degrees weirder and darker and macabre and strange, but also we're creating the look, the clothes, the physicality, the sound. So the accent was a nod to Michael Caine, because he's the one who came up with the SAS background that or pushed it properly in the Nolan film. So it's been a blast, really, filling in the gaps.
So you mentioned Michael Caine as kind of an inspiration. Are there other adaptations or any other comic books or series that have kind of influenced your interpretation of Alfred?
That's a good question. Lots of different films and stuff from that era, and Michael Caine, yes, he played Alfred, but also he was like the film star of the 60s. So he encapsulated that, so that's why it lent itself perfectly to it. But as I say, my starting point always is the script and learning your lines and all the boring stuff like that, really. But I immersed myself. Danny made a Pennyworth playlist on Spotify, so we were kind of listening to that, and everyone was sort of getting in the zone that way, yeah.
What song did you play?
Oh, I can't remember now. Lots of, the thing was, I thought it was going to be loads of 60s stuff, but then because we have the license to go wherever, there'll be modern day stuff, strange bits, but it's it's good. It's on there somewhere. Fun.
With so many different actors already portraying the character, what mark do you hope to leave on it?
I just want people to watch it, to be honest. I don't know about leaving a mark, but it's a daunting list to join for sure. But the way I processed it in my head, I was like, you're fine, because even though they shot all their stuff years before and it's been on and people have loved it, technically you're before them, so they're following me, not I'm following them. That's how I do it in my head, which makes no sense, but that enabled me to go to work without losing my mind.
So how is the interaction between Alfred and Thomas Wayne? Because they're kind of business partners.
Right.
So are they going more down their road? If there's a friendship there? How are they interacting?
Well, it's a by chance meeting really that throws them together. Thomas's sister is in the nightclub where Alfred works, and he comes to get her. So the exciting thing is maybe asking the question of what if that didn't happen? None of this whole thing would have happened. But there he is. But their relationship in the first season, they're not mates really. Alfred doesn't really like him to begin with, but they're kind of thrown together. I always saw it as like two tigers circling each other. There's a mutual intrigue. They're scoping each other out, and Alfred, they both possess something that the other needs. So Thomas has money and status and all these things that Alfred, as a lowly doorman or bouncer at this time, needs to get his business off the ground and get away from that. And Ben hates it when I say this, but Thomas is a wimp, so he needs Alfred's army skills to save the day, really. So as much as they're trying to get away from each other, they're constantly drawn back together. But Alfred does have a respect for him, when shit hits the fan, per se. He's also a very moral guy, and that's something they share.
Were you a fan of the Batman movies or television shows or comics growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was a bit young for the Tim Burton one, so my one's really the Christopher Nolan ones in recent years, and of course that was Michael Caine and that kind of thing. But yeah.
So, as an actor, how is it to go to a universe that has such a big fan base, but you also have the chance to tell the story from another perspective?
Yeah, it's great because it has the existing IP of Batman, but what we're doing, you could almost watch this show. Well, you can definitely watch this show even if you know nothing about Batman. It's kind of a character-driven drama, and we've just nicked characters from the canon, but it's fantastic because we have free reign. We can rewrite history. We can change anything. So we're just having fun, fucking about.
I've seen the pilot. In the pilot, there's a lot of flashback imagery.
Yeah.
So how does his work background in those flashbacks? How will that play into the season?
Well, it's a massive part, and we sort of examine the post-traumatic, what we now would call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but in the 60s wasn't really diagnosed. But that is such a huge part of Alfred, and as the series goes on, it kind of becomes a bigger and bigger thing, to the point where it almost completely overtakes him and derails him. So watch out for that. That was a lot of fun. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
Had a good time.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So how is it playing this in the
Well, I was excited by playing a villain because I think to be a good actress, you have to have a lot of empathy, and I don't really like villains when they're just like straight up nasty, because I just think they're a bit one-dimensional, and I don't think that's very realistic. I think that I have a lot of similar feelings to the character that I played. I just don't necessarily respond to them in the same way. I just don't stab people to death because of my feelings.
So we don't see so many women like are the bad guys on the story. So how you define yours, and what is the most exciting part about being the bad?
I think what's brilliant about the DC universe and the history of the films that have come before, and we have treated this like a film, it's not really a TV show, it's just a really long film. I think that, what's interesting about them is that really they delve into subjects and themes that affect all of us. It's all about the human condition and about psychology and our misplaced feeling in the universe almost. And I think as a female character particularly, what was important to me was, number one, I didn't want to be the main thing that people feared about me to be their desire, because I think that women have a lot more going for them than sex. I mean, we're great at that as well, but it's not our only thing. And I think that I had a sort of very clear interpretation of Bruno Heller's writing. I sort of felt like I knew this person, like I had references. I don't have my own accent in it. I have an accent from the north of England. It's different. And I sort of had it just in my mind that I wanted to play with what makes us the same as human beings and not sort of emphasise a gender divide. I think her motivations, there's often parallels between her motivation and Alfred Pennyworth's motivation, even though that he's considered the good guy and she's considered the bad person. And I wanted to play with that idea that sometimes they were confused, like how did we both end up fighting for the same thing when we're supposed to like not agree? And I think socio-politically that's like important, when we deal with subjects of class, race, gender divide. That's what's often, when people get confused when they have extreme opposing ideas, and then they're like, hang on, the inherent thing underneath it all is we're all human beings and we have the same desires and we have, the same need for human connection, and I feel like that's what I wanted to put into this villain. She's deep.
Unlike your male counterparts who are all based on a character in the DC comic books, yours is a brand new character. How did that feel for you, and what inspired you when creating this original character?
I feel like that I sort of just answered that. Like the emphasis was about me saying, okay, my stamp on this universe needs to be a female villain character that is profoundly deep, has layers, and is taken seriously, not just as like a piece of art, for want of a better word.
So in the show, she's kind of working for someone, but kind of a little bit more about like her background of how did she end up in this position,
in this world.
She enjoys.
She's a working class woman. She has a sister, and she's a little bit of a liability. She's like me. She's got a bit of a short attention span, and she feels frustrated by the norm, the everyday, and she's sort of found a place to put her talents into working for an extreme far-right political group, which is kind of part of a weird sort of underbelly of civil war that's happening in London. So I think it's kind of very reflective of the current political climate in Britain and America, that there is kind of like this weird 50-50 thing of like good and evil, and everyone's butting heads with Trump, Brexit, all of that is happening in the show but kind of replicated.
Is she one of those kind of people that kind of thrives on chaos? That's where she lives? Or?
I think she's addicted to it, and she doesn't really know very well how to get the human connections that she wants. She knows how to deal with chaos, and she knows how to deal with violence, and she's also very aware of her own powers.
Thanks, guys. That's all the time we have.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing your evil laugh.
Oh yeah. I don't actually do much.
Thomas Wayne.
So, you actually have already broken a record because, there's been many Thomas Waynes in history, but you, in the first episode of Pennyworth, you've already exceeded all of their screen times, combined.
This is true.
They're all that they ever do is walk down an alley and get shot.
And die. And look a bit scared.
And at the end of the first episode, no alleys, no gunshots, So
we are in an alley, but no gunshots.
Yeah. So, you feel a chill up your spine whenever you're in an alley. So
yeah. Is he going to die?
Let me check this script.
That's been a really fun part of it, actually, is the kind of, we know where he ends up, but we don't know where he begins at all. And I think in the comic books we see that when Alfred obviously tells Bruce about him, that we just see that he's very moral and a do-gooder and an upright citizen. So we know that he ends up as this principled moral character, but we're looking at Pennyworth, his journey of how he gets there. And something that Bruno's been really good at as a writer, and I think that it's very a big part of Pennyworth, is that you can't necessarily always tell the difference between our heroes and our villains. There's a lot of grey space in between them. They're not that black and white. And it would have been boring to have just played Thomas as this kind of super intelligent do-gooder, but he's thrust in some quite kind of morally compromising situations throughout our series. And I know in the comic books he works in medicine. In Pennyworth he's caught up in this kind of world of this very covert world of espionage and underground intelligence, and he's forced into a world of violence that he's not very comfortable of being a part of. So in answer to your question, it's been fun to know where he ends up, but it's been even better to kind of be part of creating where he starts.
To kind of flow off of that personality, because you don't have a lot to go on, so do you kind of base him off like a pre-Bruce, or how do you build his personality?
Yeah, I think Bruno, the show creator, had a very clear idea of who he was. When Emma Pates, who plays Martha Wayne, who becomes a huge part of the series, when you usually go for an audition, you usually get a 2-line bio of what the character is. Bruno's descriptions were half a page each, so they were very, very detailed. And for Thomas, he wanted Thomas to feel like a 1950s film star, so he wanted him to feel like Cary Grant, and very much a fish out of water, because he's the only American in the show as well, and it's obviously set in 1960s London. So I think basically all of us really relied on Bruno's scripts, as well as kind of collaborating with him to find out who the characters were. And we got these episode to episode, so I didn't ever know what was going to happen in the next episode, which is a really interesting way to make a TV show versus do a film, is that you're discovering the character as you're going along. So I had a very clear idea of him, but suddenly an episode arrived and I'd be like, he's this person as well. So that was exciting to kind of be part of that.
So kind of going off of that, like you mentioned, Thomas Wayne, his most thing that he's defined for is dying. What would you like your character to be defined by, or what mark do you want to leave?
His moustache. What I like him to be defined by? I guess that he's. What's been most interesting and exciting has been that me and Emma, that me and Martha Wayne, we know that our DNA goes into Batman. So it's kind of been knowing that the moral side of Thomas ends up being the moral side of Bruce, and the unexpected violent side of of Bruce we actually get to see in Thomas as well. So I think that just to be remembered as the DNA that then becomes Batman's dad, Bat Daddy. There we go. Good question, but I was like trying to work it out.
Can we talk a little about how is the relationship between your character and Alfred? How that will work out in the season?
Yeah, so it's not like Starsky and Hutch. It's not buddy. They need something from each other, or definitely Thomas needs something from Alfred. So as I said, he's this fish out of water in London, and he's working in this slightly dangerous world, and he needs protection, and he needs Alfred's smart and streetwise know-how to kind of navigate his way through this dangerous landscape. Alfred isn't very interested in Thomas, but Thomas sees him as a great asset and wants to try and involve him in his work. And it's kind of Thomas stalking Alfred and trying to get him to come and work for him, and he does that in various different ways. But Alfred's quite reluctant. He's quite suspicious of Thomas, and rightly, really, because I think along with the audience, the other characters in the show don't quite know who Thomas is or who he's working for, or whether he's good or whether he's bad. So they're quite wary of each other. They're like kind of two sharks circling each other, basically. But I'm interested to see when the friendship begins, because you get tiny elements of that throughout this first series, but it's mostly them trying to work each other out, sizing each other up, scoping each other out. So yeah.
Is there much interaction with Thomas with Beth?
Thomas and Beth. They are in the same room once, but he very much knows about her. But no, me and Paloma haven't got to act together yet. Oh, have you met her? Yeah. Yes. So you know. So yeah, I kind of can't wait for that. Actually, I don't know how their two characters would interact. But I'd be interested to see.
You got to go to the Batman Hall of Fame induction, the other day. Looks like going to your son's, award ceremony.
We helped induct him. Yeah. That was kind of crazy. That's when I think you arrive here and you realise how big a deal. Well, you already know it, but just how big a deal Batman is. It kind of feels like the king of Comic-Con. So I think that was quite an exciting first night for Jack and I. We were like, whoa, because this place is just overwhelming, isn't it? And our show is made for this audience. So it's been exciting to be able to present it here and try and get some hype built around it, basically.
Going back to Martha, I know she's not introduced immediately. So how does she come into the show, and what is your relationship like immediately? Is it sparks, or does that also take a little bit of work?
Yeah, that's not instant attraction at all. They don't agree on much, and they don't really like each other. They're forced to work together, it's more about repulsion than anything else. But we start to see the sparks of chemistry between them, and they're both very high-minded. They're both very intelligent, so they're like these sparring partners. And Thomas is becoming a bit more cynical, and she's very, very ideal. So he just gets frustrated by her being this kind of wide-eyed idealist, and he's trying to educate her a little bit. She's a bit more maverick than he is. He's quite kind of he wants to play by the rules, where she's a bit wilder. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of Comic-Con.